well, how are you going to cope in your first training sessions? And he just walked in and straight away, Johnny Gorman, my assistant at the time, we just went, look at him. Looks like he's been here forever. You know, he's a young kid, 21. He wasn't a young kid, but compared to the experience that was around him. And it was a very, very experienced squad, actually. The likes of Shearer, Sheringham, you know, Ince, Tony Adams. Yeah, it was a really, really experienced squad. And he just stepped out on that training pitch, as did David Beckham, as did this crop of youngsters that we had from Manchester United at that time. Very exciting time. And he just looked at home, and I went, yeah, he'll do for me.
So we're going to get back to Glenn and Paul in just a quick second. But before we do, if you like this video, please like, share and subscribe. And don't forget to put your thoughts in the comments too. And I want you to think about this one question. Was Paul Scholes and Glenn Hoddle underappreciated during their primes? And what could the England managers have done to have gotten the best out of those players and England? But here's Glenn Hoddle talking about how much he loves Paul Scholes.
When I talk to you about Paul Scholes, what's the first sort of memory that comes into your mind as when you kind of first had him on your radar?
As soon as I became England manager, it hadn't been in the squad, but I knew I earmarked him and Bex actually straight away to be brought in. Straight away, because what I'd seen of him, he was just top quality. And he then continued that for the next, 15 years after, whatever it was. I think you were about 21, but he had everything. Paul, you know, I've gone on record of saying this guy sitting next to me is everyone says to me, who's the best player you've coached, blah, blah, blah. It's Paul. I say Paul. Because you could see he wanted to win the ball, and he went in sometimes. I'm thinking he's going to get sent off a few times. That was the only problem he had as a player. If that's your only weakness, then you got a chance. So he was excellent. His technique was second to none.
So you obviously weren't involved with England. Do you remember like the phone call or the message from Glenn, or how did it work in those days? Did you get a letter from the FA or something?
Pigeon.
Oh, God, I can't remember. So I think I probably just read it on Sky Sports. What?
Whoa.
I just read it on...
Can I just point out, that's only because at that time BT Sport didn't exist.
Exactly, I was going to say that. Yeah, I just think I picked it up as normal and was surprised. I was quite...
You were surprised?
Oh yeah, of course I was. I hadn't played that many games in Manchester. I was a late developer. I would have been possibly 21. And,
you were 21?
Yeah, and I think the other lads were like 18, 19. You're thinking Nicky and Gary and Phil and Bex were in before me as well. And it was a chance to take. Look, a chance you've got to try and take. And once you get it, you've got to be good at it. I think the first game was here actually against South Africa. Came on with 10-15 minutes to go with Ian Wright, Paul Gascoigne, playing with all these unbelievable players and.
But as a manager, I'd done it as a player, so as a young player coming in, you have to, it's a nervous thing, you're in the training ground with all these players, you know, going through that. I looked at, and I look at that, you know, as a manager now, I'm thinking, well, how are you going to cope in your first training sessions? And he just walked in and straight away, Johnny Gorman, my assistant at the time, we just went, look at him, looks like he's been here forever. You know, he's a young kid, 21. He wasn't a young kid, but compared to the experience that was around him, and it was a very, very experienced squad actually. The likes of Shearer, Sheringham, you know, Ince, Tony Adams. Yeah, it was a really, really experienced squad, and he just stepped out on that training pitch, as did David Beckham, as did this crop of youngsters that we had from Manchester United at that time. Very exciting time, and he just looked at home, and I went, yeah, he'll do for me.
Did that confidence belie any nerves that were under the surface?
Yeah, obviously it helps when you've got a coach who believes in you and you know, wants to bring you into the squad and thinks you're going to improve it. I think the big help coming into the squad nerves-wise was I had 4 or 5 mates with me. Do you know what I mean? Who'd already been around the stuff, and I was always asking, what's it like? What's he like? Because I'm playing with players that I've grown up watching. You know, you think the likes of Tony Adams, you mentioned Paul Ince, who had watched there in the first team and played a little bit with. So I think that transition into it was a lot smoother than it normally would be.
Were you the sort of player to be asking them what to expect, what it's going to be like, or was your approach just turn up and let your football do the work?
Yeah, I think my approach was because I was watching all these experienced players that I'd seen. I wanted to impress them. I wanted to show that I was worthy of being in the squad, whether it's in training, doing a little five-a-side possession, whether it's shooting at the end of it. My job was to make sure I felt like I was in the right place with these players, that I could compete with these players, I could play with these players, and trying to earn the respect of the manager first, of the coaches, and then the most senior players.
That's what you want to do. I remember going back now, there was Kevin Keegan, all these players, Trevor Brooking, and I'm a youngster. That's what you want to do. You're not quite sure yourself, there's a slight little doubt. You believe in yourself and you believe in your abilities, but there's always that doubt until you get there, and then you start to compare and you think, hang on a minute, they're great, they're brilliant, but actually I'm holding my own here, or I'm doing even better than that. So that's how you actually, as a youngster, you sort of push yourself. There's little doubts in there that later on in life, you haven't got any of them doubts. They're gone. But that's the part of the growing up as a player.
Paul Scholes and Glenn Hoddle have got a lot in common, really, because they were two players that, had they been any other nationality, they would have been revered in their primes. And they would have had their national teams built around them. I mean, you hear like Xavi and Iniesta and Lionel Messi talk about how much they loved Paul Scholes when they were kids training at La Masia. And I mean, Glenn Hoddle, I think it was Brian Clough who said Glenn Hoddle having 50 caps for England was an absolute travesty because he was the most technically gifted player of his generation in England. And you look at, say, France back in the 80s, like Michel Platini was a similar kind of player. Very technical, amazing passer of the ball, dictated games. And the French team built the team around him and they won the Euros. And if you think about all the players that England had in the 80s, wow. England have never suffered from having from not having good players play for the national side. And Glenn Hoddle back in the 80s was... Well, he could have played for any team in the world in his prime. And I don't know what it is with England back then, back in the 80s, 90s and noughties, because they had two of the best technical midfielders in the world in those given eras, but no one seemed to be bothered. Like Bobby Robson seemed to be more worried about having Brian Robson in his side, which, fair enough, Brian Robson was fantastic, by the way. I think it was Sven-Goran Eriksson that Paul Scholes had in his prime for England. He just seemed to be too bothered about getting Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard in those teams, which were two players who were quite similar to Brian Robson. And it's almost like England have always had this fascination with box-to-box, ball-winning, Roy of the Rovers type midfielders. And Paul Scholes and Glenn Hoddle weren't those kinds of players. They were very continental style. And it was really refreshing back when Glenn Hoddle was the England manager, because he understood that. And he built that England team around Paul Scholes, and he famously dropped Paul Gascoigne because he knew he had Paul Scholes. And tactically, Glenn Hoddle was amazing. He was terrible at man management. When he threw David Beckham under the bus after getting sent off, that was a travesty. And the things that he said about disabled people and things like that, it's just, come on, mate, use a bit of common sense. However, tactically, he was amazing. If only he kept his mouth shut, because England back then played a 3... What was it? I think it was 3-5-2. That was it, yeah. So it was Campbell, Tony Adams, and I think it was Gary Neville were the three at one point, and they had David Beckham as a right wing back, and he had Graham Lasseau as a left wing back, and then it was Paul Ince and Paul Scholes in the middle of the park, and then it would be Sheringham and Shearer, or Shearer and Michael Owen up front. And that was really clever because, one, it got the best out of two of England's best technical players at the time, which was Paul Scholes and David Beckham, but also it solved the left wing problem, because we didn't have any left wingers, and England always liked to play 4-4-2 prior to that. But because we didn't have any left wingers, he played wing backs with Graham Lasso, who was fantastic. But the point I'm trying to make is he understood how Paul Scholes needed to play, and it's unfortunate that things didn't really work out for Glenn, because I think we'd have got the best out of Paul Scholes over the long term, and he probably would have played for England for a lot longer had England utilised his strengths more. But I'm glad that England they seem to be a little bit more technical now. A little bit, anyway. They're embracing that kind of holding player, the more technically gifted player. So they've got Declan Rice in there who can sit and spring a pass. Angel Gomez seems to be getting a little run out as well, which is nice to see. We still have that dynamic box-to-box player in Jude Bellingham, but that's fine. That's fine. As long as it doesn't turn into the Jude show, because England need to build a side, especially a side in today's game that is a lot more technical. But anyway, I hope you like this video. Please answer the question. Were Paul Scholes and Glenn Hoddle underappreciated in their given eras, and what could have been done to utilise their strengths more back in the day? Thanks for watching.